to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. And happy birthday to my regular Wednesday co-host, Jody Lynn Craven. It's her birthday today, and she's taking the day off for obvious reasons to go celebrate, but we will see her again next week. In the meantime, I am joined today by Satya Lila, who has one of the more unusual life callings that we have had here on the program. She is into the sex, and not only the sex, but she's into making sex a significant portion of not just something that you do as a couple, but something that's part of your life, something that's part of your way of being. We're going to learn a little bit more about that in just a moment. But Satya, first of all, welcome to the program. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here with you.
Glad to have you. And now that I've teased, to use the word that everybody would tend to use with that, now that I've teased
Good word.
the topic a little bit, why don't you tell people what it is that you really do?
All right. Well, I work with women and couples teaching sacred sexuality. It's a way of using the sexual energy for healing, for connection, for spiritual purposes. It's working with moving sexual energy throughout the whole body, awakening the whole body so that the whole body gets energized and alive and full of pleasure and vitality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was reflecting as we were getting ready to do the program today back to when I was growing up. Sex was something that you just didn't even talk about. I mean, it was never, ever talked about.
Yeah.
And then over the course of my lifetime, it has become talked about a little bit more and 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 then a lot more and a lot more. But even today, we're still at a stage where there isn't a whole lot of conversation compared to what perhaps it could be. I mean, there's some.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than there used to be.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you grade this on a scale, but if 100% is where we want to get to, we're what, maybe 50%?
I don't know how you would grade it on a scale. I think the biggest thing that we need to do is to work with the shame that is inherent in our society around sexuality. That's been my mission in all the thousands of couples and single people that I have worked with. It often comes back to working with sexual shame, because that's such a pervasive shame about such a fundamental part of who we are, that it really creates a big block, a big disconnect in our person, in our being, because we're ashamed of the essence of who we are.
And there are so many different layers to that too, because we have teachings, trainings, conditionings that come from a wide range of angles, starting with our primary family growing up, but then throughout our lifetime. I mean, it comes from every direction with every different value system you can imagine.
Yes, it does. I call it the obsessive repressive cycle.
Yeah.
Obsess about it because you're repressed.
Obsessive repressive. That's not a bad term, actually. That pretty well describes it. Yeah. So I imagine that probably keeps you busy in terms of your practice, but how does that also impact what's going on society-wide? I mean, from your perspective, when you look at what's happening sexually speaking and sexually relationship speaking, society-wide, how do you see it?
I think that sexual shame is at the root of a lot of our problems, because it is it's a negative attitude towards sexuality, towards the body, towards the feminine. It encourages the patriarchal, dominating kind of environment that we're hopefully moving out of now. Hopefully.
I didn't hear a whole lot of optimism in that one.
I think it's still a work in progress. But I would like to see it. One of my teachers said that if we could heal sexual shame, everything else on this planet would fall into place. Our attitudes about the earth, our attitudes about domination in countries and war, and all those things can be traced back to the sexual shame.
Interesting view. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what I think about that, but I'll be curious to know more about what you think and why you think that as we're talking here.
Mm-hmm.
But let's dive into it from a more personalized perspective, because as you were pointing out, shame plays a major role in it. I think there are probably other factors as well, but shame I think would have to be at the top of the list.
Yeah.
Because for something that it's very simple, it's one of the most complex things we deal with.
It is. It's multi-layered. There's so many aspects that I work with my clients, and ranging from who teaches you how to do it. How do you ever learn how to be a good lover? How do, when I was
A lot of
when I
stumbling around
was
was what I remember, but yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, a lot of stumbling around is what I
Yes,
remember. Yeah.
indeed. I remember that too.
Yeah.
Nobody teaches you
No,
techniques and
no.
information that's fundamental, the differences between men and women's responses, and how women like to be approached from the outside in and men like to be approached from the inside out. That's just one example. There's so much of that kind of just how does it work? And
Mm-hmm.
then there's the relationship, and sex isn't just confined to the bedroom. You're bringing your whole relationship to the sexual connection. So if there's distrust or disturbances in the relationship, it's going to show up in the bedroom too. It's hard to have good sex if you're not trusting your partner, or there's an element of surrender that is necessary, and trust is necessary for that surrender. And then there's the energetic and spiritual aspects of sexuality, where you can direct the sexual energy into the upper energy centers of the body and have this incredible expansive merging with the divine energy. I've had experiences where I've just like turned into light from sexual energy, and just been like they're going hearing the angels sing.
Yeah, sure. You made an interesting descriptive statement there. You talked about women from the outside in, men from the inside out. Talk about that a little bit more, because I'm not sure that I've certainly never heard it described that way, and I'm sure many others have not heard that either. So let's explore that a little bit.
Okay. And I want to say this is a generality, and I don't necessarily equate male energy with only men and female energy with only women. So I'm just talking in really general terms here, and it's not hard and fast, which I could make a pun about, but
Well, there's lots of opportunities for puns. We're trying to be restrained today, but yeah.
So women in general tend to like to be touched from the outside in. And what I mean by that is start at the feet, start at the hands, start at the back. We don't like, most of the time, we don't like really erogenous zones being touched first. We like our energy. You can in the yogic system, there are energy pathways that are called nadis, and they say there's one main one that moves up and down the spine, but there's other minor ones that move, and they say there's so many that there's 72,000. And
I often wonder who counts these things. I mean, I'm
it
not
was a
doubting you. I just
project. It was a project.
one, two,
One, two.
three.
I kind of look at it as every single hair on my body needs to be stimulated to wake up that part of my skin. And the more I get that touch all over my body, the more when I do start receiving more erogenous touch, like the nipples or the genitals, there's room in my body for that energy to spread out. Mm-hmm. The pleasure spreads out and fills up my whole body. Mm-hmm. And I'm ready for it then. If I do something that's faster, it takes a while to have, for that to really happen. But it's fun. What else would you want to be doing?
I totally get it.
It's like having the attitude of not trying to get to the good stuff. It's all good stuff. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, but if I skip over that warming up period and go straight for the good stuff, which I have done in the past to please a partner before I knew the importance of it. And it's easy for women to override what they need to and be rushed along in a man's passion. And I got to talking about the men in a minute. But anyway, if we as women override that, then we don't get as much pleasure. There's not as much room in the body for the pleasure to be held. It's all localized in the nipples and the genitals, and it's not like a full body orgasm, which is what the slower buildup leads to, is an orgasm that you feel in your whole body from head to toe, waves of pleasure that mm-hmm. can last an hour at a time. It doesn't burn out the quick peak and drop of a peak orgasm. It's a valley orgasm that just keeps waving with highs and lows, and it doesn't burn your body out. So you can stay in that energy for a long time. So that's how a woman.
Let me ask you something before you go further with that. There's something I want to ask about, because so far we're talking about heterosexual behavior, but there's also mm-hmm. homosexual behavior, and I'm wondering, does the same kind? Because I'm hetero, so I don't really have that background at all. Does the mm-hmm. same, from your knowledge, does the same kind of patterns play out in homosexual behavior, or is it different kinds of patterns?
Well, I don't have any experience with man-to-man sexual relating, so I couldn't speak about that. I've only had a few relationships with women, and they've all been after I was in that already in that tantric know-how. Mm-hmm. And so it just tended to be that way. I think that it's, as far as people who haven't been trained in sacred sexuality, I'm not really sure how, because I don't have that experience.
Okay.
I think it's likely that there's a range of preferences, probably a bigger range than with heterosexual things, but I don't have the personal experience to talk about it.
Yeah.
So
perfectly fair. I mean, I just didn't want, there's a segment of the audience, and I just didn't want to leave that segment out, because there's.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But continuing what you were saying, though, a couple thoughts came to my mind. One thought that came to my mind is, well, yeah, especially with the outside in, inside out thing. If you have any degree of intuition as a guy, and I think almost all guys actually do, you learn that one pretty quickly.
Yeah.
If you try to rush it, it ain't going anywhere.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah, that's true.
So I mean, it doesn't require a heavy level of intuition. I mean, you get the feedback pretty quick if you try to push it the other direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not like that one's hard to learn. I think probably a harder one to learn is your own.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you about that.
Okay.
The typical male pattern of preference of arousal is, from what I hear from the men that I've worked with, is that it's from the inside out. Like most men are really happy if you go straight for their lingam. Lingam is a Sanskrit word that means wand of light, and it's a literal. That's a literal translation. It's a word for penis, but I like the wand of light concept because that has a whole other connotation that you can work with. That's really, really awesome. But I can get into that. I don't want to digress. I want to stay focused here. So
It's all about the focus, that's for sure.
yeah. So anyway, the what works best for a man is to go from some genital stimulation and then spread it out, and more, then come back to the genitals and spread it out a little further, and keep raising the energy and spreading it out so that he gets that same kind of a full body opening, but in reverse. Because he will, if it's a full body opening, moving in like I described with the woman's approach, it's kind of boring to a man. He's going to be laying there going, "When's she going to touch it? When's she going to touch it? When's she going to touch it?" And I don't.
Interesting to hear, because this is not exactly me at all. I mean,
Okay.
My own experience is pretty much the opposite. Like
Great.
I'm much more. I'm much more interested in the, I guess I'd call it the spiritual connection, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
You know, how am I connecting emotion? That's the better term, the emotional connection. I'm much more interested in the emotional connection. And the rest of it, the order almost doesn't matter. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but for me, the only order that really matters is emotion first and then the touch.
Yes.
And if it works in that order, and after that, it's about coordinating the two after that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And sacred sexuality is really, a lot of people are really born knowing it. Not everyone is. And the patterns that I was describing are extremes, and there's a continuum there, and not somebody might be right in the middle, or somebody might be way one end or way the other end, so there's this is kind of generalities that are designed to wake you up to a concept.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's always the risk with generalities, that we're going to miss the exceptions every time whenever we talk about a generality. But on the other hand, they're useful. I mean, it's useful to understand where preponderantly does stuff go, where preponderantly does stuff tend to play out. So it's still valuable.
Yeah. And that emotional connection that being needed before the physical connection is a really basic concept in sacred sexuality as well.
It? Okay.
Yeah, opening the heart, making the heart connection before you go into sexual energy. And that's something I work with my clients with too, is techniques to quickly drop into a heart connection using breath, mostly breath, and looking into each other's eyes, and some verbal techniques as well. So I actually developed a couples connection ceremony that gives you step-by-step things you can do to create that connection before you have a physical connection. And I offer it for free on my website. You can download a PDF file from my website.
Give us a clue, though. I mean, now that you've teased us with, we're going to use this word a lot, tease. But now that you've teased us with this idea of a couples connection ceremony, give us an idea of what the ceremony is like.
Okay. Well, it's a step-by-step procedure to drop into connection. My partner and I have been doing this for many, many years, and we do it once a week just to honor and nourish our connection. as part of when we had a commitment ceremony, one of our vows was to nourish the relationship. And this is how we do it. It's like a devotion. It's, a devotion to each other and to our relationship. And, excuse me. Sorry, it was getting dry.
I understand the feeling. I often have to do it myself. I keep a cup handy.
Yeah, me too. It starts with some verbal exchange, checking in with each other. How have you been? What's up for you? What's up mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever, physically? What do we need to talk about? And I've been really into the law of attraction for about 15 or 20 years now, close to 20 years. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we do is appreciations. Mm. We go back and forth
always saying, no matter what kind of topic you're in, that's always a good thing.
Yeah, it just sets the stage. It just sets the environment. And we do some spiritually focused things that we're in alignment with. So it's exercises that cover communication and heart connection and energetic connection, and it's all and waking up the body. It's all things that help you when you do get into more sexual connection. You're there, you're present, you're connected, and it makes for a much, much deeper and richer experience. It was something that there was a time when he and I had been together for about maybe 3 years, and we'd had a really sweet, lovely physical connection. And I was going through some hormonal changes as I was getting older, and things weren't working as well for me. And I got into a place where I got kind of touchy and irritable, and I was a little hard to be with. And I saw him one time. We went through this over and over. And I saw him one time just like get so despairing. He was sitting slumped on the side of the bed. We had gone through the cycle again, where I was like, you're not touching me right. I didn't say that, but that was my attitude. Mm-hmm. It was very unenlightened of me, but I have my moments.
Nobody said that the road to enlightenment was easy.
No, definitely not. This is filled with things of, I shouldn't do that. So that was a moment. And I looked at him and he was just like, His face was all long and sagging, and he was slumped over, and my heart broke looking at him because I love him so much. And we'd had such a beautiful sexual connection, and it was really important to both of us. And it was just so hard to see where we had gotten to. So that motivated me. That was a real catalyst, that moment. That really motivated me to start finding what works now, what works with my body now. And, we started exploring it together, and we came through it even closer and more connected than ever. And sex is different now, and it's even better than it ever was. Wow. It's deeper and it's different. It's not as physical. It's more spiritual and more energetic. And, sometimes it'll be just like kind of the lightest touch. He might not even touch my body, just hover an inch away from my body, and I'll be going, whoa. And he gives me room and space to let that energy move through my body, so that, because he's learned, I had to learn myself, and then I had to teach him what I needed then. And I learned so much that I've actually focused a lot recently on working with people who are struggling in that area of being hypersensitive, or people after menopause, or people who are having to rediscover their bodies, or maybe discover them for the first time, because there's such a wide range of what people like. And nobody, especially with women, there some women, like I mentioned, hovering an inch away from my body turns me on tremendously.
Mhm.
And other women are saying, do it harder, more pressure, and a man's supposed to try to figure that out. And, you're supposed to automatically know. I don't think so.
Yeah, the automatically know part, that doesn't work too well.
No, it really
You
doesn't.
basically have to do a lot of experimenting and ultimately learn to actually talk about it. That's probably the hardest
Yes.
part, is
Yes.
recognizing you have to. I mean, sometimes you just have to say, "I don't understand," and,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's particularly tough in a sexual uh, uh, relationship, in a sexual situation, because traditionally the male is the initiator, and
Yeah.
so he's supposed to initiate, but he's in a place where he's not sure what to do. That's not a comfortable place to be.
Yes.
There's nothing about that that's going to make you feel relaxed for sex.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. One of the things I do when I work with couples is facilitate communication about sex, because I've talked about sex all my life, ever since I learned about it. I was into it.
Once you found, like, okay, I'm doing this one for a while.
Yeah. Well, I had a few detours along the way, but I finally got there. 30 years ago, I got there. So for 30 years, I've been teaching about sex. So to me, it's like completely normal and natural. And people will say to me, I can't believe it's so easy to talk with you about this stuff.
Mm.
I can't believe I'm talking about this. It's so hard to talk, with anybody else, So um, having that kind of like positive attitude towards it really makes a big difference. And it loosens up the inhibitions about talking about it. And it's really necessary to to communicate. Like you said, I would feel sorry for if I was a man trying to approach a woman who didn't want to talk about what she liked, because then you're like just bumbling around in the dark, quite literally, usually, you know.
Well, actually, more often than not, we're going to be bumbling around in our own dark, trying to figure out how we're going to bring stuff up that we were trained for, years. You're not supposed to bring up in the first place.
Yes,
I mean, that's the bigger one to overcome.
yes,
And
yes.
this is actually, I mean, we're talking about a subject that it's always fun to talk about because you can make jokes about it and so forth. But this is actually a very big deal. Um,
Mm-hmm,
and it was actually brought home to me in a very strong way. A few episodes back, I had an expert on about she's an expert in menopause, in
mm-hmm,
perimenopause.
mm-hmm,
And in the course of our conversation, she pointed out the shame that's involved with women who've gone through menopause and are at
mm-hmm,
the other side of it, and they're still dealing with the symptoms of it.
mm-hmm.
And when she was talking about that, for the first time, I had a new idea about why my own marriage fell apart. Because
Oh,
I'm divorced now a year and a half, and
uh-huh,
literally it was a complete shock to me when she left. I
uh-huh.
mean, yes, things had kind of slid over the last couple of years, but we had had a long run of a really good relationship. And then what happened, and what made it particularly confusing, is my ex-wife was a former psychotherapist, so she knew how important communication was. I figured, well, I knew there was something wrong, but I just need to give her space, and she will tell me when she's ready. And she never told me.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't
Oh,
understand why. I mean, I even talked to her
mm-hmm,
on the show for many times. I'd make allusion to the fact I wish she had talked about it. I don't understand what happened. The guest who was talking about menopause gave me the first clue that I'd had in that year and a half journey as to why it may have fallen apart. Maybe my ex had been going through symptoms related to postmenopause that had never really stopped, because I
mm-hmm,
certainly wasn't aware of it. I mean,
mm-hmm,
I had no idea that anything like that was going on. But as
mm-hmm,
I thought back, I thought about certain situations, like, clues that you get along the way. I said,
mm-hmm.
"Yeah, that would kind of add up."
Yeah,
So this is a big deal. This is a
Yeah,
really, really big deal. This is basically the difference between your relationship surviving and thriving and your relationship falling apart.
yeah, 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 it really is. And that shame, it's part of the sexual shame that I was talking about earlier. It that's a manifestation of it that people don't think about too much, but
Mm.
that's a really good insight that your other guest had about the shame there.
Yeah. I mean, it was literally the first time that that thought had even entered my mind. It had never occurred
Hmm.
before.
Yeah,
Because how, like you said earlier, if no one says anything, how do you know?
exactly. You got to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet I also know from personal experience, from my own upbringing, all the different ways that we're taught not to talk about it, particularly my generation. I was like the
Hmm.
tail end of the baby boom generation. You didn't talk about it at all. I mean, it
Hmm.
was not even allowed on the table. It was just not
Yeah.
part of it. It was not part of the set of options to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a lover who once said to me, "You talk about sex more than anybody I've ever met." Because I was always, we were new. We've been together maybe a month or two, and I just had. I was always saying, "Wow, I loved that. I loved it when you did this, and I loved it when you did this, and I loved it when you did this." And that's the perfect way to train somebody,
Yeah.
is to tell him what you love.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah, and he's already a success. You know, uh, and it's so easy to train like that, in that positive way. Just look for what you like and say.
But it's also a challenge for both because in order for the woman to express that to her man, she has to know what it is that she likes.
Exactly. Yeah,
And vice
yeah,
versa. It works both directions.
yeah,
You both have to
yeah,
know what you like. You
yeah,
both have to know what works for you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I often will give homework to people to pleasure themselves alone and just pay attention to what they like, so they know it's a fundamental thing.
Hmm.
You can't tell what you don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And if it's even more like for me, I was expressing earlier how I'm not so much, I guess, the typical male in that I'm not more of an inside out kind of guy. I'm not really outside in either. I'm more like emotion first and then physical. But
Hmm.
the having one without the other, like just going pure physical for me, will
Hmm.
actually take away from the experience.
Yeah,
It actually makes it less interesting.
it is. Yeah, there's only so much variety you can get from rubbing body parts together.
Yeah,
It's boring after a while.
it's boring and, for lack of a better term, it's not stimulating.
Yeah,
It just, I
yeah,
mean, and over time it becomes less and less. The more that
yeah.
you try to do that, if you don't have anything else going on, it just it. I mean, I totally understand from personal experience why it is that people would stop having sex,
Hmm.
because after a while, just that just gets boring.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So yeah, that's a big deal.
yeah.
You also have a a thing, and I don't really know what this is. I'm giving terms based on what you and I talked about before we got going here, but you have something called a sexual communion gateway session. What exactly is that?
Okay, well, first let me say what sexual communion is. That's actually the name of my business, and it's referring to the deep communion you can have with another person, uh, that is facilitated by heart connection and sexual connection and spiritual connection. So it's like mind, body, and spirit, and heart. And so the sexual communion gateway session is something I offer to people that's for free. It's a phone session with me that where we will explore what your challenges are in your sexuality, and what you'd like instead,
Mm-hmm.
what your I'll help you create a vision of what you want, and I'll give you some ideas of how you can get started towards that vision. And that might include doing further work with me, but I don't always invite that if it's only if I think I can do some good. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to work with people that I don't think I can help. So,
I understand that. Sure. Yeah. Especially with something like this. I mean, you definitely want to get it right. So yeah.
yeah, definitely. So, there's no pressure, no strings attached. It's just a gift that I want to give because I really care about this topic. So it's so fundamental to people's happiness. And because I don't know about you, but if my relationship isn't harmonious and flowing, if my energy isn't flowing, my sexual energy is fuels me in all my life. If that's not flowing, I'm I'm really not as present. I'm not as happy. I'm not as enthusiastic. I'm
Sure.
not in the vortex as you
Yeah.
know. I'm disturbed, and I don't want there's ways out of most quandaries. So I want to be there for people to do
It's
that.
one of those things that perhaps doesn't seem all that important while you're still in it. But like I said, I'm divorced a year and a half. I'm not in a relationship. I haven't been for over a year and a half. And
Hmm.
you miss it.
Yeah,
You miss it when you don't have that going on.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there are other kinds of relationships, and they certainly help tremendously. I mean, I've talked numerous times about how I love doing this podcast because I get to meet all kinds of interesting people and
Oh
get all
yeah,
interesting
I bet you
perspectives
do.
and talk about energy exchange, massive energy exchange. I mean, it's really great.
Uh-huh.
But that one piece has been
Hmm.
missing for quite some time, and you notice it and you feel it. I mean, you're
Yeah.
right. I can't say that it knocks me completely out of alignment, but it certainly affects me, and it affects my
Hmm.
ability to be aligned and
Hmm.
to stay in alignment.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
it's a piece that once it's missing, it's like you feel it.
Yeah,
Especially if it was there for a long time, you notice when it's gone. You notice
yeah,
it big time.
yeah. I have a suggestion for you if you'd
Sure.
like it. It's not exactly the same, but it's kind of giving you the same, giving you a similar energy.
Hmm.
Is cultivate a relationship with yourself.
Mm.
Look into the mirror, look into your eyes, say "I love you" while you're looking into your eyes.
Hmm.
Feel your heart connect within the mirror. Pleasure yourself in front of the mirror. Say "You have such a beautiful body," and stroke your body. It sounds edgy maybe, but it's actually very powerful.
Well, it makes
And
sense because I mean that's certainly not, a non-sexual version of that is certainly part of what I do anyway. So I can certainly see the advantage of adding in that extra piece to it.
yeah, yeah, and it'll get your sexual energy moving again. I mean, I don't mean to assume that your sexual energy is not moving. I don't want to insult
This
you
is
or
one of those
anything.
challenging conversations. No matter what phrase we come up with, we always stumble. So it's okay.
Yeah. So anyway, it's really good for getting the sexual energy moving if you're on your own. And when you're walking through the world with your sexual energy in motion, things just flow.
Mm,
The synchronicities happen. The light turns green when you get there. It turns
mhm.
red if you need to stop and take a drink of water. And it's like stuff like that. It's like there's universal flows, and we
It makes
line
total
up with
sense. Yeah.
that in our sexual energy. When we learn to move that energy through the whole body, especially, we line up with the flows of the universe, and it becomes much more easy to be in that flow.
It makes total sense, especially with everything we've ever talked about here on the show about how law of attraction works and so forth.
Yeah.
That energetic flow is based on you believing that the energetic flow exists and that's
Yes.
part of your life. And
Yeah.
even if it's not there, you still have to find a way to make it part of your life. So that this is obviously an extension of that. It makes
Yeah.
total sense. Now, does
Hmm.
that mean I'm ready to go actually make the change, I'm not so sure about that. But nevertheless, at least I have an idea of what I need to do.
Yeah, you do. You can do it when it's right for you, if it ever is.
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, the key part there is that you're in privacy. You're in your own private space. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, in that sense, it's not any different from being in a primary relationship, because you want it to be your space together,
Yes.
and nothing else interferes in it. Nothing else
Yes.
is allowed to be a part of it.
Yes. Yes.
So kind of the same thing.
Yeah, it is. You can really go all out with it. You could get yourself flowers, make yourself a nice dinner, or take yourself out to dinner.
I actually, this brings up something I was thinking about earlier, and then I kind of forgot about it. But I'm kind of curious to know what's your take on the idea of, I think it was author Gary Johnson, love languages. What do you think of love languages?
I think they're really accurate. I don't know a lot about them, but I've kind of heard the concepts, and um, I think it's really true that we have different love languages. I notice that I do different things to express my love for my partner, and he does different. We have some in common. Sex is both of our love languages, so that's fortunate, to have an overlap like that. But he brings me gifts, and I hardly ever bring him gifts, but I do little things for him, and so we each have our own individual expressions, and have some in common as well.
And one of the key aspects of the book, the five love languages, is the idea that everyone's love language ratios, if you will, are different. So the five love languages, I believe, are touch, quality time, words of affirmation, gifts, and acts of service. And so, like, for instance, I took the little survey, the little quiz you can take recently, because I met somebody, we were comparing notes on it. And my latest time taking it, touch came out number one, with a very close second tie between quality time and words of affirmation. Gifts were so far down the scale that they didn't even matter to me.
Yeah.
And acts of service was a little bit above that, but not a whole lot. So but that's just me. I mean, somebody else, it could be flipped around. So the point is
Yeah.
that he tries to make is, if you can understand among those five where that person is, that gives you a starting point for understanding how to build relationship with that person.
Yeah. 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 I think there's a lot of validity to that.
So, I mean, even if you weren't using gifts, for instance, I mean, that may have been appropriate. It just depends on what the love languages of the two people are.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And that was something that was true with my ex. My ex, actually, that was a sticking point, because for the longest time, I was one who had the belief that gifts was more transactional. So it was taking away from the love piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember my ex making comments that suggested for her it was just the opposite. I never really played well into that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really grasp that it was an actual love language. I
Yeah.
hadn't even read the love languages at that
Yeah.
point.
And it's easy to assume that what you like is what the other person likes.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire world doesn't revolve around me. Come on.
I remember with my first boyfriend, I used to want him to touch me lighter, so I would touch him lighter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he wanted he wanted me to touch him heavier,
Oh, okay.
harder. So he would touch me harder, and I'd cringe back and touch him lighter.
Yeah, that's a
We
push
go,
for you. Yeah.
because we couldn't talk about it then. So, we were too embarrassed to be talking about it when I was
Right.
16 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you just said something else that brings something to mind. Much has been written about it. Songs have been written about it. Books have been written about it. The earliest experiences that people have with
Mm-hmm.
sexuality. And it's particularly poignant in my own case, because the family I grew up in was very anti-sexual when it came to anything outside of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And even with marriage, they didn't want it to happen until you were in your mid-30s. So it was very repressive.
Yeah.
What I learned from my own experience after that was, by bringing that into my own early nascent sexual environment, I barely had one because I was so blocked. I was blocking myself so heavily with what I've been trained to believe in,
Mm-hmm.
and that messes with you.
It does.
It
Yeah.
messes with you a great deal. It can take a lot to not only break through that, but um, to grow past it, to find ways of letting go of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since, like you said, there are no manuals. There's nobody teaching us how to do this. So we're trying to figure. It's almost like we're blindfolded and we're kind of feeling our way, trying to find our way from point A to point B, and we don't even know where point B is, but it's got
Yeah.
to be somewhere out there.
Yeah. And we have no idea what point B can be.
Right. Yeah.
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 It's
So it's more than the blind leading the blind. It's the blind leading the blind to the blind spot.
that's a really good phrase. I like that.
It doesn't help you to get there, but it does explain it well.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
So the reason I bring that up is since everybody comes into their earliest experiences with sexuality from different trainings, different backgrounds, and so forth, there are going to be certain overlaps, but there's also a lot of differences. What can we say about how not only we get into those, but how we grow out of them later on? Because inevitably there's going to be some degree of confusion and frustration and I don't know what to do that comes out of any training that we get before we become sexual beings. And so there's going to be consequences that come out of that. And we're dealing with all this without having that training, without having a guide, without having a clear sense of how to navigate out. I kind of think that people end up getting stuck and not getting unstuck, or if they do get unstuck, they get unstuck on this thing and then they get stuck on that thing. And it just becomes a great big pinball game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can. That's why I do what I do, because it's always a process. You know, when people come in to work with me, or Zoom now since the pandemic, I'm still doing Zoom. But when I connect with somebody to work with them, they may have one thing that's bringing them in, and in order to deal with that one thing, like I'm not orgasmic, or I come too soon, or things like that. In order to deal with those kinds of things, then you have to undo, like unsnarl a tangle. There's like pull this thread and what's there, and this thread and what's there, and just exposing it is a big step. Revealing it to another person is a really big step, because so much of it is shame-based, and shame kind of dissolves when another person witnesses you. That's a really potent medicine for shame, is to be seen, and still loved for that thing that you're ashamed of so much. And so that's really the key. Working with somebody who doesn't carry sexual shame is really helpful. I remember working with a therapist once when I was in my 30s, and I was in a relationship that wasn't happening sexually, and I wanted to talk about it with my therapist, and I started to bring it up, and he said, "We don't talk about sex here."
Oh, jeez.
I was like, well, I don't have anything else to say.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it was so important to me. But anyway, that just blew my mind. But it was probably better that he said that, because if he was that uncomfortable with it, I didn't want to be talking to him about it.
Yeah. I mean, well, in the sense, he did you a favor. He basically was saying, "I'm not the right therapist for you."
Yeah. And I didn't come back because of that.
Good move. Probably not a difficult decision to make, but good move.
No, it's pretty easy. Yeah. Yeah, but so anyway, our finding people that you can who can hold that energy of a positive view of sexuality until you can
Mm-hmm.
is really a big piece of the healing work when you trace back, like, how did this happen? Like what you were talking about, the blockages happen from being shamed about being sexual,
Mm-hmm.
most likely.
Mm-hmm.
And undoing the shame undoes the blockage.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's like anything else. When you shed light on something, it has a sterilization effect, I guess you could say. It it
Yeah,
it sterilizes the toxin that was hiding in that shadow.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I tell you a story about something, a couple I worked with? They
No,
just
we
popped
hate stories around here. Don't tell any stories.
in. Oh, shucks.
No, go ahead. What the heck? We'll make an exception.
Thanks. It's a good story.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I was working with this couple who basically really loved each other, but they had been together about maybe 6 years or so, and they were getting a little stale sexually with each other. And they had kids and jobs and busy life. And um, but they made time to work with me, and I was doing some work up here on my land. I live in the Sierras in Northern California,
Hmm.
and out in the country. And
Beautiful area, by the way.
it's lovely here.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a medicine circle out in the back where I do retreats with clients.
Mm-hmm.
And they were up here for an in-person retreat. And she had been raised in two different fundamentalist religions, one
Ooh.
from her mother, one from her father.
Oh my.
And
Yeah. Wow.
yes, she had a heavy load of shame.
Mm-hmm.
And we worked with that. And something I said penetrated in. I was talking to the little girl inside her, and something I said penetrated in, and I saw a shift happen in her. And then later, I was guiding them in connecting, and it's a very private space. There's thick bushes all around and trees and no neighbors anywhere. It's very secluded and private. And um, later, they both got naked, and I got her to stand up. She stood up, she raised her arms up, and she was beautiful. She looked like a goddess.
Mm-hmm.
She was just chest up, heart open, big
Mm-hmm.
smile on her face. She
Mm-hmm.
looked
Yeah.
gorgeous. Her husband was just sitting on the ground looking up at her like, oh my God, what
Yeah.
a beauty,
Yeah.
And that was a big turning point for her, for both of
Sure.
them. That was so I still see that image of her. She looked glorious. She looked like a beautiful, voluptuous goddess. She was,
That was one of those rare opportunities where someone who loved her very much got to see her opening up in a way she'd never opened before.
yes,
That's one of those rare things when they happen. You
yes,
have to really treasure those.
yes, yes. And that was a real turning point for them.
I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was
As we had mentioned
beautiful.
before, this is multi-layered, and so as soon as I go to the multi-layered vibe, if you will, I think about, well, okay, she did her opening up. How did that affect him with his opening up?
He was pretty open sexually anyway. His process was different. He was more. Um, I had to teach him calmness.
Mm.
He was kind of hyperactive and scattered, and it was more about getting him to be present. And we worked with breathing techniques and things like that to help him get more present and connected with her. So um, it was, two different paths coming together.
Yeah. Sounds like it was a very satisfying coaching situation for you.
It was, yeah, they were so sweet. Yeah.
That's fabulous. 30 years you've been doing this. I mean, this
Yeah,
is not your typical career path. Young girls growing up don't grow up and say, "Well, I'm going to be a sexual counselor when I wake up." It's just like
no,
that's like way down the path from Barbie dolls. I mean, it's
it
just
is, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, I didn't even know about it until I was in my early 30s, mid 30s, maybe. I didn't
mm-hmm.
even know about sacred sexuality.
Mm. Well, it's a phrase. I don't think I even heard that phrase, sacred sexuality. I've heard it before, but I don't think I'd ever heard it until I was well into adult years.
Yeah.
Certainly never when I was growing up. That was because we never talked about sex anyway, so I never heard any phrases. But even if
And
we had, that
yeah.
was not going to be one of them.
Yeah. It's, yeah, a lot of people go, how can sex be sacred?
Well,
But
okay. Well, let's go to the basic then. How can sex be sacred? Let's just talk about that for a second.
okay. Um, there's lots of ways. Like one of the things that I like to do is um, invite the goddess to enter my body. And I say, I'm here, I'm giving you my body I'm talking to the goddess. I'm giving you my body. I want you to come into my body and use my body to show this man how much you're loved by the divine feminine. And
Okay.
I just let her come in, and I'm in a completely different space. I'm not thinking about personal stuff so much. I'm letting myself be a channel for divine energy. And so my hands are pouring energy out my hands into his body. My breasts are spouting fireworks of stars all over him. Um, I might dance for him. I might. It varies, but that's a kind of a general idea of I'm giving myself over to the divine to worship this man. And this man I'm worshiping has a lingam, the wand of light I mentioned earlier, the
Mm-hmm.
penis, the wand of light. He knows how to channel that light. He brings the light in through his top of his head and down his spine and out his lingam. And he visualizes filling me with light with it, whether he might just put the tip of it on my heart or on my forehead, or if it's inside me, he'll sometimes give a pulse of light, and I'll feel it, and he says I always react when he does that.
Hmm.
So we're channeling this energy back and forth between us. That's holy energy,
So,
divine
so
energy.
clearly, a key portion of the idea of sacred sexuality is the transmission of energy, exchange of
Yeah,
energy.
yeah, yeah. And the circulation of energy within your body, circulating the energy from the pelvis up the spine, opening the other energy centers that are located along the spine. You can do that within your own body.
Mm-hmm.
And it acts as a catalyst. I like to use a metaphor of a rocket shooting up. The fire in the pelvis, the fire of the sexual turn on, is like the rocket fuel that flames and propels the rocket upward.
Mm-hmm.
And we channel you can channel it up with intention and with breath. And you channel it up and you go out and merge with the universe, with the divine energy, with the light, with God, however you want to think of it. Something that is bigger than us, infinite light and love.
This is an appealing way of looking at it because, like I said earlier, my own structure. I'm not sure what terminology to apply to it. My own method is emotion leading into physical, and the idea of tying in spiritual energy plays nicely with that.
It does. Yeah. Yeah.
Because anytime that you're talking about emotion, there's a spiritual side to that anyway. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
when you're actively focusing on that, everything you were describing is very much of an in the now kind of a moment.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I can I could see how that would actually work. That would actually play
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, it does. It's a beautiful experience. The physical gives you the catalyst for the energy, and then you can learn skills to work with that energy to direct it in different ways. You can use your breath in different ways to either cool the energy down if you want to slow down for a moment, or heat it up if you want to move faster. And so a lot of that happens naturally when you're being sexual. The breath will speed up or cool down, but you
Mm-hmm.
can also deliberately prolong the experience by cooling it down,
Mm-hmm.
because the energy doesn't go away. It just drops for a little
So,
while, and
yeah.
then you can bring it up again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It becomes a whole different, it's not linear like a lot of Western style lovemaking is, where, first there's foreplay, then there's the intercourse, then there's orgasm, then you're done.
Yeah.
That's kind that's kind of the Western style. But um, in with sacred sexuality, which is mainly Eastern focused, Indian and Tibetan and Taoist China, is where it's sourced from. Um, that is much more in the moment. Like, you may be aroused for a moment, and then something may shift, and you lose the arousal for a while, and just hang out, and everything's okay, and just keep loving each other, and it comes back and it starts again, and you can go anywhere. It just lets you cool off so you could go even higher the next time.
Is this? I've never studied anything having to do with what they call tantra or tantric sex.
Yeah.
Is that what that refers to?
Tantra is, a short answer is yes, but a more exact answer is sacred sexuality can include more than Tantra.
Okay.
And Tantra can include more than sacred sexuality. Tantra is a whole set of practices of mantras and meditations, specific meditations and chanting and things like that. And sacred sexuality doesn't have to include all those. And there are other sources of sacred sexuality besides Tantra. The Cherokee Indians had a version of sacred sexuality called Kwadoshka.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us about. I've never even heard the term, so you give us a little bit of information about that.
I've only taken a couple of Kwadoshka workshops, so I'm not an expert by any means. But
Well, you're more of an
they
expert than I am, because, like I said, I don't even know the word. So.
okay. It's a version of spirituality that uses breath work. It's similar to Tantra in a lot of ways. It's similar breath work, even though it originated from Native Americans in this, in here in this country, instead of from India.
Mm-hmm.
But um, there are circulating patterns of energy. There's also a whole system of um, classifying the types of genitals, like wolf woman or coyote man, or they based on shape and size and what you like. And there's certain types of male and females that like go together well, like coyote man goes together well with deer woman, or I don't even remember the names anymore.
Wow.
It was a long time since I did it, but that's you've basically heard all I can remember about it
That's
now.
fair. Hey, you gave me more than I knew. I mean, why not?
Yeah.
I just looked at the clock, and it so often happens we fly through an hour, and I say, wait a minute, where'd the hour go? And this is another situation where
Yeah.
that's always an engaged topic, and
Yeah,
most
it is.
topics are engaged, but this one was definitely engaging. Um,
Good.
but there are a couple
Yeah.
things that we need to do before we wrap up for the day. First of all,
Mhm.
for someone who wants to work with you, how do they find you?
My website is the best way. It's called satyalila.info. And I'll spell that SATYALILA.info.
And I'll make sure I'll include a link in the show
Okay.
description notes too.
Okay. And you'll find a section in my website that has free stuff. And that's where you find the sexual communion gateway session and the couples connection ceremony guide I mentioned earlier, and also other guided meditations that I've created that are free to listen to.
Very good. All right.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. We'll make sure we send people that way. There's also a practice that I've been following now for a couple of years, because I noticed that nobody was doing it, and I said, "Well, this needs to change." But the thing that I'm referring to, this thing that nobody pays any attention to, is we now live in the 21st century, the age of the internet, the age of content creation and content sharing and so forth. That's how you're ending up on my podcast. I'm sure you do other podcasts. I don't know if you've written any books or written articles, or there's probably a variety of materials and stuff that you put out. You mentioned things that you put onto your website. So there's lots of different ways that you've put content out to the world. And I noticed a few years back that now that we're all content creators, we don't get credit for that anymore. And I said, oh, that doesn't make any sense to me. So I like to make it a point to say, on behalf of those people you've never met, never seen, never will meet, never will see, who've been consuming that content, who've been seeing it and getting benefit out of it in ways you didn't know about, on their behalf, thank you for what you're doing, because you're making a difference.
My pleasure. I actually do write. I write a blog that's on my website, and I love writing. It's really fun for me to do. And so I put something out every couple of weeks or so.
That's great. That's fabulous. Yeah. Well, Satya, thank you so much for joining me on the program. This has been a really interesting conversation. We've explored some areas that we've never explored here before. Not too surprising with a topic like this. We've gone in the sexual direction a few times, but yeah, as usual, we covered some new ground. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. You're a wonderful host. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Okay, now I'm blushing. That's all. Time to wrap up the show. So thank you very much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.